Okay, this is chapter 8, creating a republican culture. So this has to do with democracy in society. We're going to first start with the economy, look at transportation, and then look at egalitarian, which basically means equality for white men, women, and then we're going to look at blacks as well, the Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening in terms of religion. So first of all, the first bank of the United States, it was chartered by Congress in 1791 and it lasted until 1811. The bank established a way to pay war debts and to have a common currency. Prior to this, each state had their own currency, and so it made it difficult for trade and commerce. The bank also issued loans and regulate or control commerce among states and with other countries. It was proposed by Alexander Hamilton in one of his financial plans, and it was signed by Washington. The bank did improve the economy. It encouraged entrepreneurs, but these new businesses needed a way to expand their commerce. So the way to do that was Congress finally approved a a national road in 1811. The first one that was created was the Lancaster Road. It started in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it went to Lancaster. It was about 60 miles, I believe, of transportation, and this allowed for westward expansion and westward commerce. In 1811, the national road also was started, but it was not finished until 1850 in St. Louis. So it took a while. But the Lancaster Turnpike right here was the first national road. In other words, it was the first time that the federal government issued money to create a national road. So government funds expanded the West and expanded trade. Now this was the overland trail that started, but it wasn't the only one. There was other method of expansion to the west. The Erie Canal was completed in 1825. It started in 1817, and it connected the Atlantic Ocean down here with the Great Lakes over here. So in the Great Lakes, we have western farmers that were able to load their grain and ship their goods to the east via the Erie Canal down the Hudson River to the eastern cities and also to other European markets. It boomed New York's economy. The Erie Canal is established in New York, and then other states soon followed New York's example. They started to build their own canals, and those countries and states, sorry, also improved their economy. Initially, the Erie Canal was seen as a joke, and people kind of made fun of it, but it actually helped. It cut trips by days. So we see here an example. Horses also were able to walk along the canal. Actually, a lot of times these horses were the ones that were pulling the boats, depending on how big the boat was. So this kind of gives you an idea of the Erie Canal and how it cut through the land, and it was able to create better economy for the West. Prior to the Erie Canal, ships had to go all the way up north to Canada and down the river here, and that took a long time. So what we see here, we have an economic boom because capital, meaning money, was established by the banks, and then transportation through canals and turnpikes, like the Lancaster Turnpike, helped expand these markets. Now, another major cause of this boom was what becomes known as eminent domain. This is friendly government policies that encourage business. So an eminent domain, this is the forced sale of private property for the common good. So if you had a house in the route of the Erie Canal, the government forced you to sell your house, and they pretty much destroyed it and built the Erie Canal. So a person or a family lost their home for the benefit of the community. So government assistance programs like eminent domain also help westward expansion. Now, it seems like everything was going well, and then in 1819 we have a panic. It's called the Panic of 1819. Very simple. The reason this panic happened was dubious banking policies. Certain banks issued more loans than what they had the capability for or they made certain treaties with their favorite customers. There was also competition in the world market. So at this point, the wars between France and England pretty much had ended, and so these European farmers were able to grow their own crops. So American farmers were no longer supplying the world's market, and as such, the goods that the American farmers were shipping were no longer as profitable. And here's the result: 30% drop in agriculture, and stores and banks that had issued loans to the farmers declared bankruptcy because the farmers couldn't pay their loans. Another effect was that land prices dropped by up to 50%. So if you had purchased a land, it was no longer as valuable as it was when you initially bought it. So that's the Panic of 1819. Now, through all this, there is some progress in terms of society, in particular for white men. So after the United States got its independence, white men called for political equality and social mobility. And what this map shows you is how suffrage is extended for white men between 1800 and 1830. So you see here in green on the left map that in order for you to vote in 1800, you needed to own property. Well, by 1830, a lot of those states that had required you to own property, they had eliminated that state, except for these two states. And so we do see the expansion of suffrage for men. So more men were able to vote. Now that men get these new rights and power in public forum, they focus on their family and education. Ironically, the rights that white men demanded, husbands and fathers denied it to their wives and daughters. African Americans were also disenfranchised. In 1802, for example, New York passed a law requiring African Americans to own property. So only African Americans needed to own property to be able to vote. And in 1807, New Jersey, which was the only state to have grant women the right to vote, they took away that vote, that right. So it disfranchised women on the basis that women were not fitted to perform the duty of voting. So as suffrage expanded for white men, it was denied to women. And again, men focus their attention on the family. We see here a Republican family. So you see the white man here in control of his family. So Republican family was more actually like tyrannical family, whereas the husband was the head. And the reason for that is because men control property and laws refuse to grant rights to women. For example, a woman couldn't file for divorce, but a man could. In the North, there was a cultural change as well. There was an end of arranged marriages. So this idea that now the children were able to pick and choose their mate was a sense of equality. We see here the egalitarian, the equality power. So you had the power to choose your own partner. We also see it within the marriage circle, the marriage family circle. Women now had a choice to have fewer children. Women were a little bit more empowered, and so they delayed marriages. And in some states, women were able to keep their wages. So what you see here is while the man is ahead, women are teaching their children how to be Republican citizens. In this case, they only have two children, or actually three with this one over here in the background. But it was fewer now because women decided to have fewer men. The idea that the woman was kind of the head in the household became known as Republican motherhood, and their work in the household becomes known as the cult of domesticity. So mothers were encouraged to raise their children on the principles of liberty and civil citizenship. They were supposed to provide the model for Republican citizenship by caring for their children and educating them as model citizens for the fathers to rule. So mothers, they claim, did not need to worry about having a role in the public forum, such as voting or serving in jury. What you see here is a mother with her two children, females being raised in purity, and also this symbol of fertility, that the woman was here to have children and educate them. But some women got out of this idea of called domesticity, and they called for a right to education. And so in this particular photograph, you see two females being educated in geography as represented by the globe at the center of the photo. So women did call for more equality as well, the way white men had called for. And what we see here is that there is a growth in education. So the goal was to teach students in the primary and secondary levels to reach college levels, where professors will then teach them law, medicine, theology, and political economy, which are the foundations for a republic. Some citizens, particularly the poor, like farmers and artisans, believed that education was for the elite. These ordinary citizens, farmers and artisans, wanted the schools to teach their children the 3 R's only: reading, arithmetic, and writing. That's the way they spelled it. But more important than that, the farmers needed their children to work the fields, in particular in the South. So education in the South lagged because the parents refused to send their kids to the schools in order to help them work on the fields. By the 1820s, education reformers did call for qualified teachers and superintendents to have more of a formal, unified form of education. Books encouraged honesty, hard work, and patriotism, while condemning gambling, drinking, and laziness. So education became the foundation for a democratic country as well. And you see here a female teacher. So females started to replace males as educators, and up until now, education is seen more as a female career than a male career. Here's the same picture that we saw earlier. So in the South, men call for equality and freedom, women call for education, and those same equalities and freedoms that they call for, they denied to blacks, as you could see here. So this is the Republican family and their servant, which is a dichotomy. How can you call for equality in a Republican society and family when you yourself have a slave? So equality in politics for whites and education for women and the poor were denied to African Americans. However, this idea of equality did expand to some blacks and some whites, some states. So certain states call for manumission, which is emancipation. So in Ohio, in Indiana, and in the New England regions, there was emancipation for blacks. New York and Pennsylvania called for gradual emancipation, slowly. The South, however, held on to slavery, especially in the Deep South, which are the states of South Carolina, Georgia, eventually Alabama, and Mississippi, and Louisiana. They actually prohibited emancipation and reopened the slave trade. Between 1790 and 1808, Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia actually imported slaves, about 115,000 slaves. Many ended up in sugar plantations and, again, what becomes known as the Deep South. So the South held on to slavery because they consider it a necessity, a evil necessity, to maintain white supremacy in their luxurious lifestyle. Slavery becomes known as a peculiar institution, peculiar meaning unique or odd. However, we do see the influence here of religion. Religion encouraged masters to free the slaves in order for them to be free from the wrath of God. So some masters who were religious end up freeing the slaves on the belief that they were then going to be safe. Enlightenment ideas also challenged the ideas that blacks were inferior, and those whites who took up enlightenment ideas, some of them freed their slaves. However, freedom did not mean equality. So even blacks that were free, they were being discriminated in the North as well, because whites fear that jobs were going to be taken over by blacks, and they also fear that there was going to be this racial mending, this racial mixture between whites and blacks, and that as such, the white supremacy was going to die down. Now, many people abolitionists had hoped for the natural end of slavery between the 1700s and the 1800s, but new demands for cotton and sugar, combined with Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, the Deep South, entering the Union as slave states, a new technology that made cotton more profitable actually increased slavery between 1700s and 1860, right at the eve of the Civil War. So here we see the total population, here we see the African American population, and we see the number of the population of African Americans and then the slaves. Here's a graph that also shows you how as slavery or as cotton, the demand for cotton increased, slavery increased as well gradually. There were different organizations like the American Colonization Society that called for immediate emancipation. One of their goals was to not only emancipate but resettle slaves in the country of Liberia in West Africa. It had limited success as only 6,000 slaves actually resettled in Africa. Many wanted their freedoms in their homeland, and they considered the United States their homeland, so there was no need for them to be shipped to Liberia. Now, the slavery issue grew really dire when Missouri asked to join the Union as a slave state. So what we see here is these 11 states down were slaves, and these 11 states in the North were free. When Missouri asked to join the Union as a slave state, this was going to shift the balance of power in favor of the South. So they needed to come up with a compromise. The compromise that they agree with becomes known as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. They allow Missouri to come in as a slave state with the condition that Maine was going to come in as a free state, and as such, it kept the balance of power in the Senate. Now, in addition to that, the Missouri Compromise line, the 3630 line, also stated that any states north of this line, this way, from the purchase of Louisiana, were going to be free from this point on. So slavery was banned from the 3639 line north, and that becomes very influential in the future as well.